For years I thought living under our HOA's rules was just the price of suburban peace. But last Tuesday morning when I found a bright orange notice slapped on my front door, something inside me snapped. $500 extra a month for too many cars in my own driveway. My work truck that keeps food on the table, my wife's SUV for her night shifts at the hospital, and the beat-up Honda we just gifted our daughter for her 16th birthday. 3 normal cars. 3 reasons for Karen, our power-drunk HOA president, to declare war. She strutted down the sidewalk with her pink clipboard like a queen surveying peasants, snapping photos of my property as if I were a criminal. What she didn't know, what no one in this neighborhood knew, was that I'd been quietly preparing for this exact moment. Every fine, every smirk, every midnight inspection had led to a secret I'd kept hidden for 5 long years. And tonight at the emergency HOA meeting, the mask would come off. Before we dive in, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I stared at that neon orange notice as if it were written in fire, my hands trembling while the words blurred in front of my eyes. Immediate monthly fee increase $500. Violation, excessive vehicles. My driveway, my family's cars suddenly branded a problem. I felt my jaw tighten as I reread the justification. 3 cars. That was it. My work truck, a battered Ford that carried tools to job sites, the backbone of my construction business. My wife's SUV, which she depended on for her late-night shifts at the hospital. And our daughter's first car, a dented but dependable Honda Civic that had cost us months of savings to surprise her on her 16th birthday. 3 cars, 3 lives woven into them. Normal to any family, but for Linda Carver, the tyrant in pearls who presided over our HOA board, this was a declaration of war. From my kitchen window, I watched her strut along the sidewalk, clipboard clutched to her chest like a weapon, snapping photos with her phone. She stopped in front of my driveway, tilting the camera as if angling for a mugshot. Her lips pursed in satisfaction, the kind of smile predators wear when they think their prey is trapped. I could almost hear her voice in my head. Rules are rules, Mr. Park. Perhaps if you can't follow them, you don't belong here. Behind me, my wife Hannah called from the living room. Ethan, she's out there again. Her tone was tired, worn down by months of petty notices. I poured my coffee, deliberately calm. Let her take her pictures. We're not hiding our daughter's car in the garage like it's contraband. Hannah hesitated. Maybe we should, just for a while. You know how she island. That was the thing. We all knew how she was. Everyone in Maple Ridge Estates did. Linda had fined Mrs. Johnson, our 82-year-old neighbor, for rose bushes too vibrant. She'd written up Victor Chen, the high school science teacher, for parking 6 inches over his driveway line during a snowstorm. She once threatened the Rodriguez family with eviction because their grandson's car stayed overnight. Her power wasn't just in the rules themselves, but in how she bent them, wielded them selectively like a weapon. But what Linda didn't know, what she couldn't possibly guess, was that I had been waiting for this moment for 5 long years. While she measured lawns at midnight and took photos of bird feeders, I'd been busy building something else. Every time a house went up for sale in Maple Ridge Estates, I made sure it didn't slip into the hands of strangers. Using a web of LLCs, I quietly bought property after property. At first, it was just an investment strategy, a way to secure our future. But after watching my father lose his own home years ago to a ruthless HOA that crushed him with fines, I knew it could be something more. A long game, a way to fight fire with fire. That morning, as Linda strutted off toward Mrs. Johnson's roses, my phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer, property closing complete. You now own 67% of Maple Ridge Estates. I smiled for the first time that day. She thought she had me cornered over a driveway. She didn't realize she'd been standing on my chessboard the entire time. Still, I had to keep my cool. Linda thrived on intimidation, and she was already laying her trap. At 7:00 p.m. sharp that night, she'd called for an emergency HOA meeting to discuss problem properties. I was the headline act. She'd packed the agenda with photographs, charts, maybe even a binder thick enough to impress her loyal lapdogs on the board. What she didn't know was that I had a binder of my own, thicker, heavier, loaded with 5 years of receipts, emails, and property deeds. I spread the papers across my desk that afternoon, highlighter lines glowing like battle plans. Maps of the neighborhood, each lot coded and labeled with LLC names. Copies of violation letters that proved her double standards. Security footage showing her tiptoeing with a ruler through my grass at 3 a.m. Every piece of evidence, every brick in the wall I'd been building against her reign. As I worked, my phone rang. Mrs. Johnson's voice cracked through the line, trembling with tears. Another violation. This time for leaving her recycling bin at the curb an hour too long. 82 years old, widowed, just trying to live in peace. My blood boiled, but I steadied my tone. Don't worry, Mrs. Johnson. Tonight everything changes. When I hung up, I looked at the photo on my wall. My father standing proud in front of his first house, the one he lost when his HOA bled him dry. He'd always told me, play the long game, Ethan. Never fight angry, fight smart. Tonight I would honor his words. The hours crawled. By 6 o'clock, the community center parking lot was already full. Neighbors shuffled inside, whispering, anxiously clutching copies of their own violation notices. I slipped into the back row, quiet, observant. On stage, Linda adjusted her pearl necklace and tapped her sparkly pink gavel, soaking up the spotlight. As you can see, she began clicking through a PowerPoint of my driveway, Mr. Park's property has become a used car lot. Gasps rippled through the front row, her loyal followers. The same people whose Christmas lights stayed up until March without consequence. The same people who cheered whenever Linda punished someone else. I glanced around the room. Mrs. Rodriguez rolled her eyes. Victor Chen scribbled furious notes. Hannah squeezed my hand. The tide was shifting, even if Linda didn't see it yet. Then she unveiled her trump card, a new proposed bylaw. 2 vehicles per household, mandatory garage parking, fines doubled for violators. She beamed as her husband Bob handed out copies. Shall we put it to a vote, she asked sweetly already, raising her hand in favor. That was my cue. I stood slowly buttoning my jacket and spoke clearly. Point of order, Madam President. Linda froze mid-smile. You're not recognized, Mr. Park. Actually, I said, lifting a folder thick with documents according to HOA bylaw section 73, any property owner may raise a point of order regarding voting procedures. The room went silent. Neighbors leaned forward, phones quietly raised to record. Linda's manicured nails gripped the podium tighter. She didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath her was shifting. I took a step toward the front, my voice steady. Before we vote on anything tonight, I think it's time we review who really owns Maple Ridge Estates. Her smile faltered, and I saw the first flicker of fear in her eyes. The silence in the community center was almost deafening as every eye turned toward me. My footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor, deliberate and steady, carrying me closer to the podium where Linda Carver stood frozen. For once, her smug smile had vanished. I placed my folder on the front table, flipping it open with a calmness I didn't quite feel. Inside, neat stacks of documents gleamed under the fluorescent light: property deeds, highlighted maps, and copies of emails. It wasn't just paper, it was power. You see, I began my voice, even for the past 5 years I've been making investments in Maple Ridge Estates. While many of you were battling violations over roses, grass, height, or paint colors, I was quietly purchasing homes every time one went up for sale. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide. Others exchanged bewildered glances. I tapped the map I'd spread out across the table where 2/3 of the neighborhood lots were shaded in bright yellow. As of this morning, my company holds ownership of 67% of the homes in this development. Linda's face drained of color. She gripped the podium so hard her knuckles whitened. That's impossible, she stammered, though her voice trembled. It's not only possible, I replied, pulling out the latest closing paperwork, it's legal. And according to HOA bylaws, majority ownership means majority control. The room erupted. Mrs. Rodriguez stood, her voice rising above the noise. Does that mean you can finally stop this nonsense? The fines, the harassment. Victor Chen, usually quiet, waved his notebook in the air. She fined me for helping shovel snow off my neighbor's walkway. Said my boots tracked dirt onto the street. Mrs. Johnson, frail and leaning on her cane, slowly rose. Her voice shook but carried undeniable weight. I have lived here for 30 years. Never in my life have I felt so unwelcome in my own home until this woman became president. One by one, voices joined in. Stories of absurd fines, intimidation, favoritism. Some residents pulled out their own stacks of notices, waving them like evidence at a trial. The tide was turning, and Linda knew it. She slammed her gavel down, her voice sharp. Order. This meeting will come back to order. These accusations are baseless. The board has acted only in the best interest of the community. I looked directly at her, letting the pause hang heavy before speaking. Baseless. Then perhaps you'd like to explain this. I gestured to the projector where a video clip flickered onto the screen. Linda, caught in the grainy glow of a security camera, crouched in my yard at 3:07 a.m., measuring my grass with a ruler. Audible gasps filled the room. And here I continued, clicking to the next image. We have her taking photos of my daughter's car license plate late at night. A teenager's car. What does that have to do with property values? The murmurs grew louder. Neighbors shook their heads, muttering words like invasion and stalker. Linda's cheeks flushed crimson. This is slander, you can't just. Actually, I interrupted smoothly. Everything I've presented tonight is documented. Records, emails, photos, videos. And according to Section 45 of our bylaws, any board member engaging in harassment or selective enforcement can be subject to removal. Which brings me to my motion. I straightened, projecting my voice so it filled every corner of the hall. I moved to dissolve the current HOA board, effective immediately, and hold new elections with transparent rules and term limits. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then Victor Chen shot up. I second that motion. Hands went up across the room. Murmurs turned to cheers. Someone in the back shouted. Finally, Linda banged her gavel again, her voice nearly shrieking. This is outrageous. You don't have the authority. I stepped closer, locking eyes with her. With 67% ownership, Linda, I have all the authority I need. Her face twisted equal parts fury and panic. She turned to her husband Bob, who hovered near the stage, clutching a stack of new bylaw proposals. His expression had shifted, too nervous, calculating as if he were already distancing himself from her. Neighbors began chanting, "Vote, vote, vote." The community center trembled with the sound. Phones were held high, recording every second. For the first time in years, Linda wasn't in control. I raised my hand, signaling for quiet. Before we vote, I want you all to see one more thing. I pulled out a folder thick with receipts. Here we have documentation of HOA funds allocated for a pool renovation last summer, $50,000. Yet the pool remains broken, unsafe, and closed. Where did that money go? Gasps turned to outrage. Heads swiveled toward Linda. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. It was delayed. Unforeseen expenses. Unforeseen expenses, I asked coldly. Or personal vacations. Because here's an Instagram post from the same month, our president sipping cocktails in Maui with the caption, "Thanks to my rule-breaking neighbors for funding this trip." That was the breaking point. The room exploded with shouts. Some neighbors booed. Others demanded refunds. Mrs. Johnson actually shook her cane in Linda's direction. I lifted my hand again, steady and calm. Enough is enough. This isn't just about cars or roses or recycling bins. It's about fairness, about dignity, about whether we want an HOA that serves the community or rules it with fear. My words hung in the air. The energy had shifted completely. For once, I wasn't just speaking for myself, I was speaking for all of us. And as I looked around the room at the tired but determined faces of my neighbors, I knew this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. Linda slammed her binder shut and grabbed her purse. This meeting is adjourned. She barked her heels, clicking furiously as she stormed toward the door. Actually, I called after her, my voice sharp but calm. According to Section 7.3 of the bylaws, adjournment requires a majority vote. And I don't think you have that anymore. The room erupted in applause, louder than anything I'd ever heard inside those walls. Linda froze at the doorway, shoulders rigid, before vanishing into the night. I turned back to the crowd. We'll hold the vote tonight. And by tomorrow, Maple Ridge Estates will have a new beginning. And deep down, I knew the war was only just beginning. The days after that explosive meeting felt like living in the eye of a storm. On the surface, everything looked calm. Kids played basketball in their driveways, sprinklers hissed over freshly cut lawns, and neighbors greeted each other with cautious smiles. But underneath, tension coiled tighter and tighter because everyone knew Linda Carver wasn't finished. She was the kind of woman who would rather burn the whole neighborhood down than admit defeat. Sure enough, less than 48 hours later, a thick envelope landed in my mailbox. Inside was a copy of a lawsuit, complete with her signature scrawled across the bottom in self-righteous strokes. The complaint accused me of illegally consolidating ownership and defrauding the community through hostile acquisition. She wanted an emergency injunction to strip me of my voting rights in the HOA, freezing my majority control until a court could sort things out. I wasn't surprised. In fact, I'd been expecting it. That's why my lawyer Mark was already sitting across from me in my office that same evening, sipping black coffee as we combed through the paperwork. "She's grasping at straws," Mark said, flipping another page. The purchases were legal. Every property was bought fair and square through LLCs registered under state law. There's nothing in the HOA bylaws that prevents majority ownership. She can scream all she wants, but this won't hold up. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the framed photo of my father on the wall. You and I know that. But Linda doesn't play fair, she plays dirty. She'll twist the narrative until people think I'm some kind of corporate raider turning their homes into pawns. Mark smirked. Then it's time to show the other side of the story. You've been keeping receipts for 5 years, right? I pulled out the thick binder from my desk drawer, sliding it across the table. Every violation notice, every selective enforcement, every dollar that's gone missing from HOA funds. I've got surveillance footage too. Mark flipped it open, eyebrows rising. You weren't kidding. This isn't just evidence, it's a roadmap to dismantling her entire operation. The first hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. By the time Hannah and I walked into the courthouse, Linda was already there, sitting with her expensive attorney and wearing her trademark string of pearls. She flashed me a smile, so sharp it could cut glass. She thought she had me cornered, that the court would fall for her performance. But she hadn't counted on the mountain of evidence we were about to drop on the judge's bench. Mark started with the basics: 5 years of meeting records. Times Linda had pushed through emergency measures without proper votes. Audio clips where she bragged about keeping undesirable families out of the neighborhood. Video recordings of her measuring lawns at 3 a.m. or photographing my daughter's car without consent. The judge's eyebrows rose higher with each piece of evidence. By the time we presented the HOA's financial records checks, written to contractors who just happened to be her close friends, projects billed but never completed, the courtroom was buzzing with whispers. And then came the witnesses. First was Agnes Johnson, hobbling to the stand with her cane, her voice quivering but steady. She told the court about being fined $200 for leaving her walkway unshoveled while she was hospitalized with pneumonia. Her eyes filled with tears as she described how Linda had ignored her pleas for leniency. Next was Victor Chen, the science teacher who detailed being fined for parking his car slightly over his driveway line during a snowstorm. He pulled out photographs proving the street hadn't even been plowed. She wanted to make an example out of me, he said, his voice shaking with anger. Finally, 2 former board members took the stand. They admitted that Linda had pressured them into approving bylaw changes they didn't agree with, bullied them behind closed doors, and even bragged about using fines to fund her annual vacations. By the time they finished, Linda's attorney was pale and sweating. Linda, on the other hand, was fuming. She shot up from her seat, pointing a trembling finger at me. He's trying to destroy this neighborhood, she screeched. Without me, it will fall apart. Property values will tank. Crime will run rampant. Do you know what kind of people will move in if we don't enforce strict rules? The judge slammed his gavel, silencing her outburst. Enough, Miss Carver. This court deals in evidence, not hysteria. Mark stood calmly. Your Honor, the evidence shows a pattern of abuse of power, selective enforcement, and financial mismanagement. We ask not only that this lawsuit be dismissed, but that a full audit of the HOA's finances be ordered. The judge nodded, slowly tapping his pen. Motion granted. The lawsuit is dismissed, and I will be appointing an independent auditor to review the HOA's books immediately. Linda's jaw dropped. She opened her mouth to argue, but her lawyer tugged her arm, whispering urgently. The fight had slipped through her fingers, and she knew it. When the gavel came down, it wasn't just a legal victory, it was a turning point. Neighbors who had once whispered in fear now approached me in the courthouse hallway, shaking my hand, thanking me. One woman even hugged Hannah, tears in her eyes. I thought we'd never get out from under her, she said. But I wasn't celebrating yet, because as sweet as that victory felt, I knew Linda. She wouldn't vanish quietly. No, this was just her retreat before the next strike. And if there was one thing my father had taught me, it was to be ready when the enemy came back harder. That night, back at home, I stood at my office window, staring out at the quiet streets of Maple Ridge Estates. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. The neighbors were awake now. The spell Linda had cast was broken, but I also knew the storm wasn't over, because somewhere out there Linda Carver was plotting her next move. The calm after the court hearing didn't last long. If anything, the silence was more dangerous than the shouting. Linda Carver might have lost her lawsuit, but she wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat gracefully. By the following week, whispers started trickling through the neighborhood like smoke before a fire. Some said I was planning to bulldoze Maple Ridge Estates and build a strip mall. Others claimed I was turning empty houses into rentals for undesirable tenants. And at the center of those rumors stood Linda, her pearl necklace glinting as she went door to door spinning lies. I knew what she was doing, trying to poison the well before the new HOA election. Fear was her strongest weapon. If she couldn't beat me with legal filings, she would attack me with gossip and paranoia. I sat at my desk one evening, scrolling through the neighborhood's private Facebook group, watching post after post pop up blurry photos of my driveway, claims that my fleet of vehicles would destroy property values, warnings that corporate landlords were taking over. Most of the comments came from accounts tied directly to Linda's circle of friends. But some neighbors seemed genuinely confused, uncertain who to believe. Hannah walked in, dropping her hospital bag by the door. She looked exhausted, but she tried to smile. She's at it again, isn't she, nonstop, I muttered, rubbing my temples. She's trying to rewrite the narrative before people even realize what's happening. Then show them the truth, Hannah said simply. Her words stuck with me. For months, I'd been gathering evidence, building my case like a fortress. Why not let everyone see it? Why not shine a light so bright? Linda couldn't hide in the shadows anymore. The next morning, I made a call to Channel 7, our local news station. The producer perked up as soon as I explained the situation. A corrupt HOA president accused of pocketing funds, harassing elderly neighbors, and now weaponizing gossip against the very man exposing her. We'll be there tonight, she promised. By evening, a news van rolled into Maple Ridge Estates just as Linda gathered her supporters outside the community center. She'd plastered flyers on the doors claiming I was trying to seize control for profit. But as soon as the cameras appeared, her polished smile faltered. I stepped forward, papers tucked neatly under my arm, and addressed both the reporters and the crowd. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ethan Park. I've lived here for over a decade, just like many of you. And I think it's time we talk about where our money has really been going. I laid out color-coded spreadsheets on a folding table, each one highlighting suspicious expenses, landscaping projects billed but never completed, thousands spent on administrative costs that had no receipts, and the infamous $50,000 pool renovation that somehow never happened. Here's the pool, as of this morning, I said, holding up photos of cracked concrete and stagnant water. And here's a receipt showing $12,000 paid to a contractor who happens to be Linda's cousin. Does that look like renovation to you? Gasps spread through the crowd. A few neighbors muttered angrily. One man shouted, I paid extra fees for that pool. Linda tried to interject, waving her hands dramatically. Those expenses were necessary. He's twisting the facts, but I was ready. I clicked on a projector displaying screenshots of Linda's own social media posts, vacation photos from Hawaii during the exact weeks those funds disappeared. The captions were damning. Thanks to all my neighbors for this little escape. Keep those violation fees coming. The crowd erupted. Even her most loyal allies shifted uncomfortably. A woman in the front row crossed her arms and whispered, You told us the pool money was delayed. I pressed on my voice firm but calm. This isn't just about me or my driveway or a few cars. It's about trust. It's about whether our HOA should be a tool for harassment or a system that actually improves our community. The cameras captured every word. Neighbors stood taller, emboldened by the truth. One after another, they stepped forward to share their stories. Fines for trivial things, ignored maintenance requests, favoritism that benefited only Linda's friends. And then perhaps the most shocking moment of the night, 2 former board members came forward again. This time they held printed emails, direct evidence of Linda ordering them to make an example out of specific families. One email even named the Rodriguez family, calling their home too ethnic for our standards. The reporters scribbled furiously. The crowd gasped audibly. Linda's face turned crimson, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. I didn't need to say more. The evidence spoke for itself. By the time the news segment aired at 10 o'clock, Maple Ridge Estates had become the top story of the evening. Footage of Linda measuring lawns at 3 a.m., neighbors describing harassment, and me calmly laying out documents painted a picture that couldn't be ignored. The next morning, I woke to find my phone buzzing nonstop. Texts, emails, voicemails, neighbors thanking me, reporters asking for interviews. Even strangers from other neighborhoods writing, We've got our own Karen HOA president, how did you do it? But not all the messages were friendly. Mixed among them were threats, anonymous emails warning me to watch my back, letters slipped into my mailbox with crude insults. Linda still had her loyalists, and they weren't ready to let go. Hannah squeezed my hand as we read through them. She's desperate, she said softly. That means you're winning. She was right. And yet, as I looked out my window at the quiet street, I knew the fight was far from over. The election was coming. And if Linda couldn't stop me with lawsuits or lies, she'd try something even dirtier. For now, though, the balance had shifted. My neighbors were no longer whispering in fear. They were standing beside me, demanding change. And that more than any deed or document was the weapon Linda never saw coming. If Linda Carver's gossip campaign had been a storm, then what came next was a hurricane. She knew her reputation had been shredded by the news segment, but instead of retreating quietly, she doubled down. I should have expected it. People like her don't just lose gracefully, they claw, scratch, and drag everyone else into the mud. The first sign came on a Friday morning when I walked out to grab the paper. A police cruiser idled at the curb lights flashing. An officer approached me, expression grim. Mr. Park, he asked. Yes, I said, bracing myself. We received a complaint about unlicensed commercial vehicles being operated from this address. Specifically allegations that you're running a construction business illegally out of your home. I almost laughed. You mean my work truck? The officer looked uncomfortable. We have to follow up on every complaint. Mind if I take a look? I led him around the driveway, showing him the same battered Ford truck I'd been using for years, parked neatly within the property lines. I pulled out my business license from my wallet, handed it over. Within minutes, the officer sighed, shook my hand, and left muttering something about false reports. I didn't need to ask who filed the complaint. That weekend, more harassment followed. Anonymous flyers appeared in mailboxes warning that I planned to turn foreclosed homes into halfway houses. My daughter came home shaken after overhearing classmates whisper that our family was ruining the neighborhood. Someone even spray-painted "Park equals fraud" on the sidewalk near our mailbox. It was exhausting, but I had expected it. That's why my camera system was running 24/7, and late Sunday night it paid off. The motion sensor triggered at 1, 2, 4, 3 a.m., and the footage showed none other than Linda herself, hood pulled low, slipping up my driveway to snap close-up photos of my license plates. The next morning, I handed the footage directly to my lawyer, Mark. She wants to play dirty. Fine. Let's remind her there are laws against stalking and harassment. Mark smiled thinly. We'll file for a restraining order. But first, let's talk about Monday's HOA election. Ah yes, the election. The event Linda had staked everything on. Despite the evidence against her, she still had a loyal following, neighbors too afraid of change or too cozy with her perks. If she could rally them, she might cling to power. But I had something stronger than fear facts. Monday evening, the community center overflowed. Folding chairs lined the walls, neighbors spilling into the aisles. The energy was electric tense, the kind of atmosphere that made your skin prickle. Linda stood at the podium, pearls gleaming, her voice dripping with practiced sweetness. Neighbors, I know there's been a lot of confusion lately. Certain individuals are spreading misinformation trying to divide us. But I assure you, every decision I've made has been for the good of Maple Ridge Estates. Boos echoed from the back, but she pressed on. If we allow hostile takeovers by people with hidden agendas, our property values will plummet. Crime will rise. Do we want Maple Ridge to become another rundown suburb? Her words had their intended effect. A few nervous murmurs rippled through the crowd. Fear was a powerful motivator. That's when I rose from my seat, walking slowly to the front. My heart hammered, but my voice was steady. Neighbors, she wants you to believe this is about me. But this isn't about me, it's about all of us. I turned to the crowd, holding up a stack of papers. These are not rumors. These are records. Every violation, every missing dollar, every selective enforcement. Here is proof of $50 0 pool funds that vanished into thin air. Here is video of her measuring lawns at 3 a.m. Here are emails where she labeled families as undesirable. This is what's been happening under her leadership. I paused, letting the words sink in. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Do you want an HOA that serves you or one that rules you? The room erupted. Neighbors shouted their grievances. Mrs. Johnson raised her cane like a rallying flag. Victor Chen bellowed, I second the motion to dissolve the board. Linda's face twisted, but she tried one last card. She snapped her fingers, and her husband Bob handed out a new stack of papers. These are proposed bylaws that will keep our community safe, she declared. But as the first copies reached the crowd, I heard laughter. The bylaw proposals were absurd: mandatory garage, parking bans on basketball hoops, even limits on how many guests could stay overnight. The overreach was so extreme it became comical. I leaned in, my voice sharp. This is her vision of Maple Ridge. A place where roses are fined, children's games are banned, and neighbors are treated like criminals. Enough is enough. A chant began at the back, soft at first, then louder, vote, vote, vote. The interim chair, one of the few neutral board members, stood nervously. All in favor of dissolving the current board and holding immediate elections. Hands shot up across the room. Dozens, then hundreds. The wave of support was overwhelming. All opposed, a smattering of hands fewer than a dozen. Even some of Linda's staunchest allies had turned against her. The motion passed. The board was dissolved. Linda's face turned scarlet. She grabbed her purse, shrieking, "You'll regret this, every last one of you." Then she stormed out, heels clacking furiously. The door slammed behind her, leaving only stunned silence and then cheers. For the first time in years, Maple Ridge Estates belonged to its residents again. But as I stood among the clapping, cheering neighbors, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: Linda Carver was not finished. And the next move in this war would be her most desperate yet. The night Linda stormed out of the community center, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was over. The cheers of my neighbors still echoed in my ears as we walked home under the glow of street lamps. But I'd underestimated her. People like Linda don't vanish after one defeat. They regroup, they scheme, and they come back swinging. By Tuesday morning, Maple Ridge Estates was buzzing again, not with celebration but with confusion. A flood of emails hit our inboxes anonymously signed, but clearly written in Linda's tone. They accused me of plotting a commercial takeover and warned that my ownership of so many properties meant I would enslave the community under corporate greed. Some emails included doctored documents, fake spreadsheets, showing plans to build a parking garage, fabricated letters supposedly from me to developers. Hannah was furious when she read them. She's lying through her teeth, Ethan. People are going to panic. That's the point, I said grimly. Fear is her last weapon. Sure enough, by noon, a handful of neighbors were already whispering outside, holding the papers as if they were gospel. Mrs. Collins from 2 streets over caught me at the mailbox. Ethan, is it true? Are you turning the empty houses into rentals for anyone? Her voice trembled. I looked her in the eye. No, ma'am. Those documents are fakes. Everything I've bought is still residential. And every decision I make will be transparent from now on. She studied me, then sighed. I believe you, but others might not. That night, I convened a meeting at my house. Dozens of neighbors crowded into my living room and spilled out onto the porch. I set up a projector, my heart pounding, and displayed the real spreadsheets color-coded and meticulously documented. This is the truth, I said. Every dollar, every deed, every decision, no hidden agendas, no secret development deals. If you want to see the receipts, they're right here. Mark, my lawyer, joined me at the front. He held up copies of the fake documents Linda had circulated. These aren't even good forgeries. Wrong letterhead, inconsistent dates, signatures copied and pasted. If we push, we can prove they came from her or her circle, the crowd murmured. A man in the back raised his hand. So what do we do now? She won't stop until she's dragged us all down with her. That's when I revealed my plan. Tomorrow, Channel 7 is coming back. This time, not just to cover Linda's corruption, but to show the truth about Maple Ridge. We're going to shine a light so bright even her lies can't survive it. The next day felt like a trial played out on front lawns. The news crew set up cameras in the community park, and neighbors lined up to tell their stories. Mrs. Johnson, frail but resolute, described how she'd been fined for leaving her recycling bin out while recovering from pneumonia. Victor Chen held up the violation he'd received for shoveling snow. The Rodriguez family spoke about being targeted because of their culture. One after another, voices poured out years of pent-up frustration. Then came the moment that sealed it. 2 former board members who had remained quiet during the first hearing finally stepped forward with printed emails. Clear as day, Linda had written, "We can't let this neighborhood slip. If that Rodriguez family thinks they can turn their yard into a fiesta ground, we'll bury them in violations." The crowd gasped. The cameras zoomed in. I stepped up last, holding my own binder of evidence. Neighbors, you've heard the stories. You've seen the proof. Linda tried to make us fear each other, to pit us against one another so she could stay in power. But this community is stronger than one person's greed. Together, we can make Maple Ridge a place where rules protect, not punish. Cheers broke out. People clapped, whistled, shouted my name. For the first time, hope felt louder than fear. But Linda wasn't done yet. That evening, as the news segment aired, she launched her most desperate attack. Her loyalists, fewer than before, but still loud, marched through the neighborhood carrying signs, "Stop Parks Takeover, Save Our Community." They chanted outside my home, their voices echoing into the night. Some carried torches more for drama than light, but the effect was chilling. Hannah stood beside me at the window, gripping my hand. She's unhinged. I nodded, which means she's dangerous. I stepped outside, cameras flashing from neighbors who'd gathered to watch. The protesters jeered, waving their signs. I raised my voice, calm but commanding. "Linda, if you're here, come forward. Let's talk face to face." And there she was, stepping out from the back of the crowd, pearls gleaming even in the streetlight. Her smile was gone, replaced by raw fury. "You think you've won, Ethan? You humiliated me in front of the board, in front of the courts, on live television. But this neighborhood was mine before you ever set foot here. And I'll make sure everyone sees the truth about you." I stared back at her, unflinching. "The truth, or your version of it, because I've got 5 years of receipts that say otherwise." The crowd buzzed, phones held high, recording every word. Linda pointed at me, her hand shaking. "This isn't over. I'll find another way." Then she turned sharply, heels clicking, as she stormed off into the night, her followers trailing uncertainly behind. The protest fizzled within minutes, leaving only the hum of cicadas and the rustle of leaves. My neighbors gathered around me, some clapping my back, others thanking me for standing firm. But as I looked down the street where Linda had disappeared, a chill ran through me. She was cornered now, and that made her more dangerous than ever. The battle for Maple Ridge Estates wasn't just about bylaws or fines anymore. It had become a war for the soul of the neighborhood. And the next strike I knew would be the hardest yet. The morning after the protest, Maple Ridge Estates looked deceptively calm. Sunlight spilled across manicured lawns, sprinklers arched over sidewalks, and children pedaled their bikes down the street as if nothing had happened. But under that quiet veneer, the neighborhood simmered. Everyone was waiting to see Linda's next move. It came sooner than I expected. By noon, certified letters began landing in mailboxes. I received mine with a thud against the porch. Inside was an official notice bearing the HOA letterhead, though the board had been dissolved. The letter claimed I was ineligible to vote or serve in any HOA capacity due to a conflict of interest arising from my majority ownership. It went further, stating that my properties were under review for code violations that could result in massive fines. Hannah read it over my shoulder, her face pale. But the board doesn't even exist right now. She can, I said, grimacing. Or at least she can try. She's banking on confusion and intimidation. I wasn't the only one. Calls started flooding my phone. Neighbors panicked, wondering if their notices were real. Mrs. Rodriguez was in tears. Her letter accused her of harboring unapproved residents because her nephew had stayed the weekend. This is classic Linda, I told them. Scare tactics. None of this holds water. The board was dissolved legally, and we'll have elections soon. She has no authority anymore. But panic is contagious. If people believed Linda's letters, she could still hold on to power in practice, even if it was only smoke and mirrors. That evening, I called an emergency town hall, not an HOA meeting, but a gathering of residents. The community center overflowed again, neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder, clutching their letters. The air smelled of fear and frustration. I stood at the front, microphone in hand. These letters are fraudulent, I declared. The old board has been dissolved. Linda no longer has the authority to issue violations, fines, or disqualifications. She's trying to scare us back into submission. Murmurs swept through the crowd. A man shouted, "Then why did the county clerk's office say my property's under review?" That gave me pause. "What do you mean?" He held up his letter. Sure enough, Linda had gone one step further. She'd filed complaints with the county code enforcement office, using doctored photos to make it look like residents' properties were in violation. My blood boiled. She wasn't just bluffing, she was weaponizing the bureaucracy itself. Mark, my lawyer, stepped up beside me. "Folks, this is serious, but it's also illegal. Filing false reports with the county is fraud. We'll be presenting evidence to the district attorney. But in the meantime, the best thing you can do is document everything. Keep your letters, save your emails, take screenshots." The tension in the room eased slightly, but fear still lingered. These were families, retirees, hardworking people who just wanted peace in their homes. They weren't built for war. That's when I realized it wasn't enough to fight Linda in court or in meetings. I had to show my neighbors what we were fighting for, so I shifted gears. "This isn't just about stopping Linda," I said. "It's about building something better. Imagine an HOA that actually helps funding lawn maintenance for seniors, fixing the pool instead of pocketing the money, supporting neighborhood events instead of fining them out of existence. That's what we can create together." For the first time that night, hope flickered in their faces. Mrs. Johnson raised her cane high. "Then let's vote her out for good and start fresh," cheers erupted. The mood shifted. We weren't just defending ourselves anymore, we were fighting for a vision of a better Maple Ridge. The next week was a blur of preparation. Mark filed fraud complaints with the district attorney. I met with neighbors to draft a new charter for the HOA, one with term limits, financial transparency, and clear checks on power. We printed flyers, knocked on doors, and explained our plan. Slowly, Linda's lies lost their grip. But she wasn't finished. On the morning of the election, she made her final play. Reporters gathered outside the community center, tipped off by Linda's latest stunt. She arrived in a black SUV, flanked by a handful of loyalists holding glossy pamphlets. She strode to the podium, she dragged into the parking lot, and announced to the cameras, "This election is invalid. Ethan Park is a corporate fraud, trying to buy our neighborhood. I've filed a lawsuit in federal court to stop him." Gasps rippled through the crowd. People pulled out phones, checking the news. Sure enough, a filing appeared online. Linda had gone national, claiming civil rights violations, racketeering, even community terrorism. It was ridiculous, but the headlines didn't care. Reporters swarmed me, microphones shoved in my face. "Mr. Park, are you trying to seize Maple Ridge for profit? Do you deny these racketeering allegations?" I held up my binder calmly. "Every purchase was legal. Every deed is in order. The only racketeering here is Linda's abuse of power, and tonight this community will choose the truth. Inside the hall, the election began. Ballots were cast, counted, verified by volunteers. When the results were announced, the room erupted in cheers. A new board had been elected, 5 diverse residents including Mrs. Johnson, Victor Chen, and Mrs. Rodriguez. Linda wasn't even on the ballot. As neighbors hugged and clapped, I glanced outside. Linda stood by her SUV, face, pale lips tight. She realized it too. The neighborhood she'd ruled with an iron fist was gone. Her reign was over. But as she climbed into the SUV, she caught my eye through the window. And in that glare, I saw it the promise of another battle somewhere down the line. For now, though, Maple Ridge belonged to its residents again. And for the first time in years, the air felt lighter. The first morning after the election, Maple Ridge Estates felt like a different place. Kids rode their bikes without parents nervously glancing down the street. Lawns blossomed without fear of a pink slip taped to the door. Even the air seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off the neighborhood's shoulders. For the first time in years, people smiled at each other without hesitation. I stood at my kitchen window, sipping coffee, watching my daughter back her Honda into the driveway. No clipboard, no flash of pearls, no Linda lurking with her phone angled like a weapon. Just peace. But I knew better than to think peace was permanent. Later that afternoon, a certified letter arrived, this one, not from Linda, but from the county clerk's office. Inside was a copy of Linda's federal filing. Racketeering, civil rights violations, community terrorism. Her words painted me as some kind of criminal mastermind. It was laughable, but the damage wasn't in the claims themselves. It was in the noise. The headlines splashed across local news. Former HOA president claims community takeover plot. I set the paper down, sighing. Hannah walked in, reading the headline over my shoulder. She just doesn't stop, does she? No, I muttered. Because stopping means admitting she lost. And Linda Carver doesn't lose. Mark, my lawyer, was less rattled. When I called him, he chuckled. Let her file. A federal judge will dismiss this faster than you can say clipboard. But in the meantime, we stay visible. Keep showing the community what leadership looks like. That was exactly what we did. The new board held its first meeting in the community park under string lights neighbors had strung together themselves. No gavel, no podium, just folding chairs and open dialogue. Mrs. Johnson proposed a neighborhood garden. Victor Chen suggested using funds for tutoring programs. Mrs. Rodriguez asked about community events to bring families together. For once, the ideas weren't about restrictions, they were about possibilities. I spoke last. We've all seen what happens when power is abused. That ends here. Our HOA will have term limits, open books, and clear priorities, helping not punishing. From now on, our money goes where it belongs. Into the community, not into anyone's pocket. Applause filled the park. People clapped, some cheered, others simply smiled with relief. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about them reclaiming their voice. But even as joy rippled through the crowd, I noticed a car parked across the street. Dark windows, engine idling. I couldn't see inside, but I didn't need to. I knew who it was. Sure enough, when the meeting ended and neighbors drifted home, the SUV peeled away, headlights flaring. A glimpse of pearls in the driver's seat confirmed it, Linda watching from the shadows. She was gone from the board, stripped of her authority, but her presence still lingered like smoke after a fire. 2 weeks later, her house went up for sale. A moving truck pulled into her driveway one bright Saturday morning, loading furniture boxes and bags of clothes. Neighbors watched from their lawns, whispering, some relieved, others incredulous. She didn't say goodbye, didn't look anyone in the eye, just slammed doors, barked orders at the movers, and vanished. When the truck finally rolled away, a cheer erupted down the block. Someone popped a bottle of champagne. Kids chalked good riddance on the sidewalk. For the first time, the street felt free. I should have been celebrating, but instead I stood quietly watching her car disappear. Because I knew people like Linda don't fade out. They move on, find new neighborhoods, new rules to twist, new victims to bully. Somewhere else, another community would soon feel the sting of her clipboard. That night, I walked the streets of Maple Ridge. Porch lights glowed warmly. Families laughed around backyard grills. The pool, closed for years, was finally being cleaned and prepared for repair. A sign hung on the gate, coming soon, reopened by the people of Maple Ridge. I smiled. For the first time in years, I believed my father would be proud. He'd always told me, fight smart, fight long. And in the end, it wasn't just about exposing Linda. It was about proving that neighbors, when united, could stand against tyranny and build something better. A week later, Channel 7 called. They wanted to produce a documentary about the battle for Maple Ridge. The community that took back its power, the producer said. I agreed not because I wanted recognition, but because I knew the story mattered. There were other neighborhoods out there, other HOAs, ruled by fear and fines. If our fight could inspire them, then every sleepless night, every confrontation, every tense meeting would be worth it. As I hung up the phone, Hannah walked in holding her hospital scrubs. Another shift, I asked. She smiled tiredly. Yeah, but at least I don't have to worry about whether my car in the driveway will cost us another $500. We both laughed. A small laugh, but real. That evening, I placed a wooden sign at the entrance of the neighborhood. Simple white letters carved into the wood read, "Welcome to Maple Ridge, where neighbors look out for each other." For a long time I stood there watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and red. The war with Linda was over. But the lesson remained. If this story has taught me anything, it's that real strength doesn't come from control, fear, or intimidation. It comes from unity. A single neighbor can be bullied, fined, or silenced, but when people stand together, even the most entrenched tyrant can be toppled. Linda thought she could rule through fear forever, but fear crumbles when truth and courage stand against it. In our own lives, whether we're facing petty bullies, corrupt leaders, or just unfair rules, the principle is the same: don't fight alone. Find your allies, keep your receipts, and never underestimate the power of persistence. So I'll ask you now, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you've ever faced your own HOA, Karen, share your story. Don't forget to subscribe for more, because the battles may change, but the lessons about resilience, community, and justice are ones we all need to hear.